Okay, I'm going to do another quick snapshot. I know we're a little bit short for time. Go ahead. We are, this project comes at a very opportune time. We have a long history of turning red fields to green fields, and it started at the beginning of our park system in 1929, where some of our best parks in our system came from that project, from turning commercial properties, in this case industrial site, with a park that we have, a heritage park, Reynolds Park, a quarry site, into one of the most treasured parks, a heritage park today. The Open Space Master Plan was completed in 2008, and it was unanimously adopted by our Board of County Commissioners. It also became what I call a shared values plan for the community. It's been widely accepted throughout the community. It's had really generated a lot of public support and consensus for a plan this scale. As Howard mentioned, we work with 35 different municipalities. Don't govern over them, but we need to work with them. And one of the challenges in implementing this vision is how do we get everyone on board to really help us move this vision forward? So we established what we call the South Florida Park Coalition, and it engages city, county, state, and federal park agencies to work together with us to implement this vision. And one of the things that became really critical is how do we get everyone on board besides just buying into the vision, which they have. And what we developed is what we call the Bill of Rights that we wrote with them. It's a charter, and all of this is based on the Congress for New Urbanism, which was a key participant in the development of this master plan, the University of Miami, and led by Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg, pioneer of New Urbanism and the Smart Growth movement and all of that we're all very familiar for and grateful for today in developing this plan. What you see here is as Howard mentioned, it's compiling all of these great cities and how to bring them together. And to step back a little bit, the research that went into developing this plan looked at Olmsted principles and looked at Boston's the Emerald Necklace and other parks systems designed by him. And what became very interesting for us is, those are wonderful systems, and what an incredibly opportune time when they were developed. But what about us now? We have a predominantly sprawling community, predominantly automobile-dependent, single-family home community. And the way our park system evolved, it really primarily responded for the sprawling development. But now we're changing. We have areas that are growing in density. We have different conditions throughout the county, and it's all dispersed in there. We have from the most rural to the most urban conditions. So how do we respond to all of that? So this is where we applied the Olmsted principles. And one key phrase that we always take home with us is that not one park is as significant as it is when it's connected to a larger whole. So the whole concept of green infrastructure that I think he really pioneered is something that we have brought to implement to the Miami-Dade County area, which calls for an interconnected system. And what we're saying is that parks, a park system doesn't include just parks, but in this vision, and this is a 50-year vision, it's not a nuts and bolts kind of plan, but it really calls out for the next, what is Miami going to be when it grows up, the next 50 years, 100 years. And it's going to include parks, it's part of public spaces, natural and cultural areas that we're linking to as places, and then it's going to be connected by greenways and water trails and streets that are thought of as linear parks, not just to move people, but to move cars, but to move people. And when the development of this plan, we learned many things. So those are the key elements of what we found to be a great park system that creates livable communities. And all of this is based on principles of equity, access, and beauty, and sustainability, to name a few. Next. So for this project, we are really waiting for a project like this to come our way, and we're ready for it. We've got the plan, and it's, hopefully, I wish it did land like Laura described it. Maybe it will. But what we have done in terms of identifying an acquisition strategy that is all-encompassing in the plan is to look at three key elements of the master plan. The first strategy that we're looking at is what we're calling TOPS, transit-oriented parks. And this is north-south transit-oriented parks and their connectors. These transit line, for us, it extends from north to the south end of the county. And it links business centers, job centers, commercial centers together. For us, what this means is it incorporates existing metro rail, existing transit, and future transit lines. And it looks for the opportunities, much like Scott, you mentioned in Denver, in looking at development, having parks be the catalyst of how we develop mixed-use developments around transit stations. This is really a key strategy to addressing a lot of the issues that Howard mentioned, including natural hazard mitigation. For us, responding to hurricanes and responding to them immediately is key, and we've learned from a hard way, from Andrew and other hurricanes that we've had, where we need key centers to distribute supplies. So these would too act as distributors and a means of organizing the community as a whole to react quickly to natural disasters. Another reason why the transit-oriented parks are key as well is because we're looking to them to really provide access to parks for those individuals that may not own a car or may not have access to parks in a largely sprawling community. Getting on transit and getting to a park for access to health, access to nutrition, envisioning markets here and organic markets, health markets, it's something that becomes viable. So this is our first strategy. And what I'm showing here is the transect. And I don't know if many of you are familiar with the transect, but it's an ecologically based ordering system for classifying and arranging the human habitat. That's Andres' Zdwani long description. But basically what it means is that it orders the city based on density as opposed to land use. Currently what we use is, as we all know, in our traditional zoning ordinances, what we use is land use segregation really governs the way we develop. This is based on the SMART code that says mixed use is the way to go. Look at density to really understand how you should design and classify density in the community. What it means for parks, as we've learned in Miami-Dade County, is that typically, as I mentioned before, we were designing parks for a suburban community. So we were saying, we can't accept anything that's less than 5 acres. No way, take that back. What we've learned since is that we need those 5-acre parks, and some of them need to be 2 acres or even less in some cases. And the character may change depending on where they're located. So in the transect, this is the most urban area, and what we're looking at for the transit-oriented parks are the urban core to townhomes, to the density increases as you move to the T1 area. Next. The second strategy that we're looking at is the east-west greenway and resource connectors. One of the elements that really sets Miami-Dade County apart is that we're the only metropolitan area in the country that's bordered by 2 of the most significant national parks in the country, being Everglades and Biscayne Bay. They're significant because of the water supply and as a resource that it represents for the nation. What these 2 greenways represent are connecting these 2 national parks together. As an example, this greenway here represents a 42-mile loop, 22 miles one way, 22 miles back. And this would be the first greenway in the country that connects 2 significant national parks together. This has gotten a lot of support from the federal agencies that are very interested in working together with us. This comprises alone multiple agencies already getting involved with it, over 12 different agencies that are in the process of raising money to buy land, to buy acquisition rights along that corridor. Along with Miami River, similar to Philadelphia, Miami River is a working river, but at one point it was one of the most significant natural resources that the city had. And it was significant because of flood mitigation, because of other elements that really is important to our ecosystem, and we want to restore that. So what we're saying for Miami River is buying properties along it to help with floodplain issues, to help with climate change, sea level rise, and all of the saltwater intrusion that we'll be dealing with in the future. Hopefully not, but we may. So this, the third one, or one back, is in the T1 and T2, which is the less dense area and really looks at agricultural land as well, and the natural area. Third, next. And the third strategy that we have is looking at land to address the what we call, Howard mentioned as the gaps that we have. Most specifically, they are health disparity gaps that we in Miami-Dade County have. By 2010, we have, for every 1 out of 5 children will be obese or are obese. And that's hugely significant given the population that we have. It's one that we are consistently striving to address, but it's a very dire condition. As well as really bringing together the regional parks, as Howard mentioned, address the county as a whole, and we will be addressing that with this acquisition strategy. Next. So just some very brief images, and then we've got 2 other presentations. These are kind of the sites and the before and afters that we've been looking at in terms of how these sites would transform. Next. So we're looking at transit-oriented parks. Next. And this is a site specifically in downtown Miami, the core of Miami-Dade County. This is before and after. What we're looking at is really looking at transit and properties along it that are parking lots, that are empty sites, that are not in use now, and how can we recover them? How can we make them usable for that area? Next. This is another condition of a future transit line. Next. And what we're talking about is, once again, developing the transit, the TOP, with the other slides that come with this is the evolution of the mixed use around it that we're developing now. Next. And also in terms of how these sites transform and how they really change the character of an area in terms of densification when you have these connectors, as we talk about, that may be very low density, and how then they evolve to really include parks as the catalysts for a way that you redevelop in those areas. Some of the discussions that we've had in our group is that there's a certain percentage that we're working out in terms of the developable land around it to generate revenue and other means of supporting this park. But equally as important is the character of those areas that need to address issues of security and such that we need to address. So eyes on the street and the kind of smart growth, new urbanist principles that we are applying to them. Next. And this strategy of transit-oriented parks is one that can truly extend to the Tri-County region. In our case, it extends to Broward and Palm Beach. Next. Next. Just some Miami River. I'm going to quickly flip through this. And the Everglades Biscayne Greenway. This is a before image. Next. After image. And the neighborhood parks that we begin to look at. A lot of the sites that we've looked at are commercial sites, but for Miami-Dade County, a huge amount of land that is underutilized is residential market, the residential real estate market. So what happens with these sites where you're in a neighborhood and you have joining residential areas that are also failing? Parks as a catalyst, next, can really begin to transform these areas. Go ahead, next. And for us, what it means is including things like workforce housing, next, workforce housing, affordable housing around them to really address those issues. Next. Next. I'm just going to go through them next. This is one of our heritage parks that I mentioned, Grenolds Park, that we're looking at acquiring an interesting site there for a marina next, and transforming that area to serve as a mitigation site and a marina expansion site for the park. So what are the impacts of a land acquisition strategy? John is going to talk about that.
In Miami-Dade County, we have about 4,000 acres that are currently on the market. We've identified about 50% of that to be acquired within the budget that we've been allocated, which we've spent about $5.1 billion for our program, as you see it, including the projects that Maria has mentioned. Many of our sites are corridor related along our existing transit facilities, along greenways, and also within the neighborhoods. The largest expenditures, in fact, would be to satisfy the gap analysis within the neighborhoods, providing for those much-needed disparities that we have in terms of opportunities for physical activities, access to nearby programs, and schools, et cetera, providing safe routes to schools, safe routes to parks, and preventing pedestrian accidents and bicycle accidents. Miami has you would expect it to be a much more active community overall, but in fact, as Maria mentioned, 1 in 5 children is obese. We also have a very high accident rate in Miami as one of the 3rd most dangerous areas for pedestrians and bicyclists. So those are the kinds of things, by providing parks adjacent to our neighborhoods, we hope to prevent, so that then from a health standpoint, we won't be trying to correct those issues. As part of the program, we've looked at what the job creation would be and also where there are opportunities to obtain additional revenue. In terms of job creation for construction, we would estimate about 15,000 jobs during the construction year for a 5-year period, and for the ancillary or additional job creation during that time period of about 6,000 jobs. The benefit to us economically would be, particularly along transit facilities where we've identified 2.5-acre parks at each of our transit stops, but in addition to that, an additional 10 acres, which we would retain for mixed-use development to address the transit-oriented parks and mixed-use, high-density developments that we would think would be most appropriate at those locations. The advantage is that we then can program and develop standards for how that mixed-use development should occur over time by providing for the types of density, workforce housing, which is much needed in the area, and to achieve the mix and the appropriate densities, height conditions, and other design standards around those facilities. We would be able to either sell some of that in partnerships with the private developers or retain long-term leases. In fact, Miami-Dade County has, over a period of years, about 7 locations along our existing Metro Rail line where we have entered into public-private development scenarios at many of our transit stops. And we retain long-term leases in most cases, and so we can project additional income, which would help toward either obtaining properties that we haven't been able to get through this program for additional parks, or to pay for operation, maintenance, and security in those new parks. So those are some of the numbers. In terms of tax base, which our elected officials are going to be asking, what does this mean to us? We're already seeing significant problems in terms of our property values declining, not only from the residential bubble, but now if we see that happen as well in terms of the commercial bubble, we saw about a 20% reduction in overall property values and the associated revenues last year. We would expect to see about another 10% reduction in those values again this year. We're seeing cuts in budgets across the board, including parks, and this would be a very important to us to show our elected officials that if we, in effect, put our program in the ground and have developments around our transit-oriented parks, number one, we would see about a $60 million increase to the tax revenues after the completion of those projects. Now, also that includes revenues or projected revenues in the tax base of how the neighborhoods around those areas would improve and increase in values. We're continuing to work with our economists from the county to refine those numbers for us as we tighten up our program. But that, at first glance, are the kinds of numbers we're looking at. So it would be a pretty significant program. I think would get a lot of attention from the elected officials who might be concerned about what does this mean to us? And it would be across the board, in many cases affect not only unincorporated county, but many of the incorporated areas.
Okay, Chuck Bowl from the University of Miami is going to talk about governance.
In terms of governance, it's our model is fairly similar to the one that was illustrated before, but with some significant differences in that we don't have we do have an MPO, but we don't have an MPO that necessarily we feel is the right vehicle for that legislative function that was described in the other model. In our model, there would be a nonprofit. It would be set up as a land trust with a community redevelopment focus. And that organization would have a board, just like the structure shown before, and the land trust itself would be the management organization. It would have a variety of powers, including powers to contract with existing public interest organizations that are already very skilled and have done a lot of work in land acquisition. So the Trust for Public Land, the Collins Center in South Florida, the Land Conservancy. So rather than duplicate the functions and talents of those organizations, it would probably involve contracting for that type of work. I think the difference and maybe just the advantage that Miami-Dade County has is the existence of this master plan. I mean, this master plan was developed through dozens and dozens of meetings, thousands of hours, lots of community input. So there is an existing document. There is a plan, a vision on the books that becomes the guiding document for what this entity does. And so we always have kind of the Bible to refer back to keep things in line and to stick with the mission. I think that's all on governance. One thing I think that's helpful that we've been talking about is that if you have examples, a lot of everyone's visions are indeed visions, and some of you are working on taking existing photos and doing the pretty drawings with HOK and others, and that's great. You need to do that. But if you have examples, because we're talking about commercial properties that have been converted in the past, that have involved public-private partnerships, then you have existing examples to show community leaders and others, this has worked in the past, and here are those models, and hopefully you even have some real impact figures to use. I think part of the hard part of this whole project is projecting all of this. So if you can take a look back, and there's resources like the Gray Fields to Gold Fields book. There's a whole study and a book done on conversion of old commercial properties. There's case studies in there. I know there's some in the Denver area. There's probably some in others. If you flip through the last few slides, I stuck Meisner Park in here. One not too far from us, in fact, we've been asked to look beyond Miami-Dade and also take a look at Broward and Palm. So here's an example that we might use to illustrate this to people locally. Boca Raton Mall. This mall existed for only 14 years. It was dead. Next. It was acquired. A CRA was created, Community Redevelopment Agency, for this area. The mall was actually first acquired, like we've heard, by a developer who saw the opportunity because he heard about the plan and everything. And then the CRA actually had to purchase it from him. So there was something of an inflation of price. But it was acquired. Now this Meisner Park, for those of you who don't know, it's been around for 20 years now. It's outlasted the mall by quite a bit. Next. And it created this great park plaza in the middle. This is about a 30-acre site. The park itself is 12 acres, and it's a long-term ground lease. So all the land is still publicly owned, but a long-term lease to develop around it. Next. And so there's the numbers. You traded up from maybe 250,000, 300,000 square foot mall, just retail only, and you got all this stuff. You got 12 acres of parks, you got an amphitheater, you got sites for civic buildings as well as the mixed use. And so this ties in with the transit-oriented parks concept and really tying into a livable communities framework as well as the parks. Next and last slide. and there's some impact figures. These are actually a little old, but with this kind of information, you can illustrate from existing examples what you're saying is going to happen in the future. You know, you can point back and give some examples. What was the impact when we acquired this commercial property, converted it, and what was the impact on the submarket for the real estate around it? Just food for thought.
Thank you.
Okay, Cleveland, we've got a hard stop at 4 o'clock, so people have to get out. So I want to make sure everybody has time to get to.
No, they've got to stay. We've got 45 minutes on Cleveland.
Just kidding.
We did math, and we thought 5 presentations in 60 minutes, so we tried to keep ours about 10 minutes. So hopefully you will play catch up with Cleveland. I'm Ann Zeller from Parkworks, which is a nonprofit that develops parks in the city of Cleveland. Terry Schwartz is from Kent's Urban Design Collaborative. And what Terry's going to do is really puts the work that we've done in the context of a lot of planning that's been going on for a long time in Cleveland about vacant land, foreclosed residential properties, because it's been a huge issue for us. And then Nora Romanoff from Parkworks will talk about some of the specific projects that we've identified within the context of this plan. I think what we tried to do is to see this as a vehicle. Our challenges are much different than here in Atlanta. We've got similarities with Philadelphia, Wilmington, and other cities. But what we wanted to do was, rather than create a new vehicle, see this as a vehicle to achieve some of the things that we already had on our books that we think could be very catalytic for the city. So I'll turn it over to Terry.
Okay. I'll just connect myself here to the microphone and let me make sure I know how to do this. Oh, I do. Excellent. I'm Terry Schwartz. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the vacant land initiatives that we have underway and how they plug into this larger project. Cleveland, much like Philadelphia and Wilmington, have been dealing with vacancy for a long time because of this prevailing population decline. And maybe unlike Philadelphia, we haven't reached the point of stabilization yet. Population loss has been significant. Our peak was over 900,000, and we fully anticipate that our population will be below 400,000 in this upcoming census. Which isn't to say that population loss will continue unabated. I mean, the reasons that Cleveland became a city in the first place are still as true as they were 200 years ago. We have a central location, we have a wealth of economic and cultural assets, and we have water, lots of water. And so we figure that if we can get to a point of stabilization, we have a moment where we can begin this process of regeneration and redevelopment along a more sustainable pattern. Because like most older industrial cities, when the city was growing, we did so very rapidly and with very little regard for underlying ecosystems. And so we see our opportunity here of taking what you see in red. This is vacant land in the city of Cleveland. We have about 18,000 vacant parcels across the city right now. There's somewhere between 10 and 15,000 vacant buildings, depending on how you define vacancy. And also, we're demolishing buildings at a pretty rapid clip because this is a map of our foreclosures. Again, I could make this worse because I haven't updated it based on the last quarter of last year. But there are lots of foreclosures, and foreclosures rapidly turn into abandonment followed by demolition. The city's been demolishing about 1,000 houses a year, and last year we demolished 1,700. So our problems are large and have been longstanding, and clearly the global financial meltdown and the real estate crisis haven't helped Cleveland. They've really accelerated a problem that we've had for a while. Okay, so when we speak of green space in this map, much like Philadelphia, we do not have a deficit necessarily of parks and green space. We have a park system that was designed for a city of 1 million people, and so the thought of expanding that park system raises a lot of questions. One, about how to maintain it, but two, who are we building this park system for? So in the work we've been doing around vacant land, we've been focusing on a couple of areas. One being, can we begin to find those vacant sites, which you see in red, that either are adjacent to existing facilities or connect existing facilities as a way of expanding our green space network in the city and in the county in a way that we can manage and that makes sense given the realities of our population loss. But the important thing, though, is that, in Cleveland, it isn't necessarily more parks wherever we can fit them. We really need to focus on something more directed at a high-functioning landscape. Because even though we have a wealth of green resources, we have some major ecosystem challenges, which I'll show you in a second. So if we can find a way to expand green space in a way that improves water quality, improves air quality, helps us address urban heat island effects, reduce carbon emissions, these kinds of things will provide the financial and the ecological benefit that Cleveland really needs. So even though we have a lot of park space, we don't have a lot of mature tree canopy. This is tree canopy, mature tree canopy. There are more trees in Cleveland than you realize, but the black line is the city boundary. And you can see that the suburbs have done a better job of preserving large trees. Within the city, we have small street trees and some pockets of mature tree canopy. There are aesthetic challenges here. There are real estate challenges here. And there are pretty significant ecosystem challenges by the fact that so little of the forest city, that's our nickname, it remains as forest. And so thinking about ways that we can use our vacant land inventory to restore the urban tree canopy is a real priority for Cleveland. You guys are probably tired of all of these city presentations, but bear with me. 60 seconds of soil science, and then we'll be done with this. But the important thing for us, I mean, the discussion this morning about green space, wherever you can fit it, doesn't make sense in our context. When you're thinking about high-functioning landscapes, the where is as important as the what. So we believe in the what, the green space, but the where of where it fits within our city and our county is really critical from an ecosystem perspective. What you see in this map in yellow are the areas of the city where soils have the most capacity for infiltration. So you can do a rain garden or a bioswale wherever you want, but if you do it in one of these yellow zones, it's more likely to function the way that you want it to, because the soil will meet you halfway. Hydric soils. I'm not going to explain hydric soils except to tell you that hydric soils are the places where wetland function can either be created or restored. You can do a pocket wetland wherever you like, again, but if you do it in one of the blue areas, you're more likely to get the ecosystem function, the water quality benefit that you're hoping to achieve. And I'll just tell you, to be honest with you, in the lower corner, you're looking at the airport, and the upper area is one of the city's strongest commercial districts. So the likelihood of Cleveland, kind of giving up those economic assets for an ecological return are slim. But understanding the soil conditions is critical to making good decisions about where things should go and where they shouldn't. This is riparian zones. It shows rivers, creeks, and streams, and culverts. So it shows in the darker brown areas the place where a riparian setback should be maintained, and then the gold areas show the riparian zone, where if the water were allowed to do what water does naturally, these are the places where streams and creeks would expand to. The orange strips are the headwaters areas. If we're looking to restore urban tree canopy, you do it in the headwaters. You preserve and you protect the high parts of your watershed. You develop down below. That's how you get to a high water quality benefit, and it also helps improve the overall functioning of the hydrological system for the city. Then you put vacancy on top. The whole idea here is that by understanding these prevailing conditions, it allows us to sort our vacancy and make better choices about where to develop and where to conserve, where to build green spaces and where to build townhouses and other kinds of more traditional real estate development. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. One last thing about ecosystems before I turn things over to Nora, and that's hydrology. In this map, the light blue areas are natural or channelized creeks and streams. So the Cuyahoga is our largest river, and then there are little strips of the Doan Brook and the Rocky River that are water exposed to the elements. Everything in purple, though, is culverted. This is not something that's only happening in Cleveland. It's same is true in Philly, as well as Detroit and a lot of other cities, particularly in the Great Lakes area. When cities develop rapidly, you put water underground and got it out of the way so you could build on top of it. The results of all this culverting have been pretty significant in terms of a water quality challenge, which we face now. So if we map vacancy on top of hydrology and see the places where they intersect, we can begin to make better decisions about where not to redevelop. It didn't make sense to build on water in the first place, and so now that we don't have to, we can make a conscious decision using our city land bank and our county land bank to begin setting aside these parcels, either to daylight streams, which is very expensive, or to at least begin to restore surface hydrology through a series of vegetative strategies that can happen kind of parcel by parcel. We're not afraid, by the way, of the billion-dollar numbers in Cleveland. Our combined sewer overflow problem is going to cost us $2.5 billion to address. So if we can use some of those resources, obviously a lot of those dollars are going to go underground into big gray pipes. We know that. But if we can use some of those resources to begin encouraging more natural patterns of water movement through the city and through the sewer district service area, we can reduce the amount of gray infrastructure that's required and begin to create these kinds of amenities, which, over time, add up to a larger scale system. In a sort of parcel by parcel way, we can begin creating this green armature that promotes development, improves water quality, increases watershed function and wildlife habitat. And one important thing from a planning and urban design perspective, you guys are parks people, you know this. I mean, water only goes one place. Water goes to more water. And so all of these culverts ultimately lead to the Cuyahoga and to Lake Erie. And so the projects that Nora is going to speak to are the larger scale park and green space initiatives that we can connect everybody in the city to. Because if we create these little fibers, maybe not green fields, but green fibers, we create this mechanism for linking everyone in the city to our most significant natural resources in Cleveland. So with that, I'm going to give the thing to Nora so she can talk about the specific projects. Did I do it in 6 minutes?
You were great. Right, everybody?
I talked too fast, but I really wanted to keep it short.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I don't know what's worse, going last or going after Terry. So I swear I'm just as smart. I will be quick. You know, Terry brought us to Lake Erie, and what I'm going to do is just sort of tell you quickly about our response to the Red to Green Challenge, which incidentally in Cleveland was $1.1 billion. Which we were happy to take on, but we've instead submitted a series of projects that will connect people to the water through the city and into the neighborhoods to show that this is really a series of projects that looks at connections and linkages among the projects on the list, but also to other green and community assets in the city of Cleveland. We don't want to build, we don't want to program or plan any of these projects in a vacuum. Also access. For too long, I think we've designed and planned parks that don't really take into account who needs to access them, the underserved, the residents, the visitors to the city of Cleveland. These have an accessible theme throughout them. And then finally, design. We really feel that innovative, thoughtful design is really what will help us create a series of destinations and continue the growth in Cleveland. So again, starting at the lake with Canal Basin Park, which is the canal that connects Lake Erie connects to the Cuyahoga River, connects to the Ohio and Erie Canal. This is thought to be this will be the terminus of the towpath trail. This is an 18-acre series of parcels at the river's edge that we hope will conclude the towpath trail, which is currently 110-mile bike and pedestrian trail that starts in central Ohio and Zor, Ohio, along the Ohio and Erie Canal. It's a phenomenal project, but it does not have its final mile. The towpath currently terminates just south of downtown Cleveland. We want to take it through to the river, connecting people then from central Ohio all the way up to the Cuyahoga River and then to Lake Erie. Going along the towpath trail, clearly with a 110-mile pedestrian trail, you have a number of neighborhood connections. So how do we make it so that this isn't a pedestrian trail in a vacuum? We connect it to the neighborhoods through old industrial routes, streets, through neighborhoods that have not touched the water directly ever. This is a port relocation. Currently, the Cleveland Cuyahoga Port Maritime operations are going to move east. So what will we do with it? 100-acre parcel north of Brown Stadium. The port is proposing a mixed-use development, commercial, residential. Planning has started and it's underway. Cleveland Rowing Foundation is a recreational and competitive rowing foundation that looks to acquire, I don't know how big the parcel is the Rowing Foundation is taking.
6 or 7 acres.
7 acres that will then spur additional commercial, recreational, and residential development around it. So it's the Cleveland Rowing Foundation. We hope a collaboration with area schools, with a skate park that's going in there, with a bike co-op, and then with the, again, nearby neighborhoods. Public Square redesign, we are lucky enough to have James Corner Field Operations as the designer for the High Line in Cleveland. Actually, he'll be in Cleveland on Thursday if anybody would like to join us for a Public Square forum. James, and actually Terry is on this design team as well, is taking Public Square, taking a good look at the center of Cleveland. So the sentimental, the emotional center of Cleveland. Went home to huge, thriving events is now underutilized, very unfriendly for pedestrians. It's not even that friendly to automobiles. They're looking at 3 really innovative approaches to Public Square. And these are generational projects. These are projects that, again, we want to affect Cleveland from now on, not just for a little while. This is very preliminary. This is a huge project that we really think could change the way people view downtown Cleveland. Rockefeller Park Strategic Plan is a plan that Parkworks took on. We just concluded it last year. And again, this is a key issue of access. This is a parkway, an existing parkway, but one that needs both a sustainable approach and obviously better neighborhood connections. If some of the neighborhoods adjacent to this park most affected by the foreclosure crisis, some of the poorest neighborhoods in Cleveland, and they have no access to this amazing greenway that needs a lot of help anyway. The Lake Link Trail is a proposed pedestrian and bike trail that would take you from the towpath through the flats to the river and then to the lake. Parkworks has recently acquired a 1.2-mile rail bed to continue this bike and pedestrian connection from the towpath through to the lake, providing access to neighborhoods and to residents who have no access to the lake currently, but also to visitors. And I'm going to just go to that. The Lake Link Trail would then continue on to Wendy Park, which is adjacent to Whiskey Island, which is a major lakefront green space that has huge access issues. The Opportunity Corridor, which is a 3-mile roadway that would connect some of 490, which is in the Slavic Village neighborhood in Cleveland, would connect that part of the city to University Circle, which is our Eds and Meds Center. It's also home to a number of our cultural institutions, the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Cleveland Orchestra. This project is also a good point for design. It could be a roadway, it could just be a straight shot, and that would be it. But if we can impact the residual effect on the neighborhoods that it'll go through, we're talking about 200 acres of the hardest hit neighborhoods, the poorest neighborhoods in Cleveland. What would happen if there was a thoughtful process around it, thoughtful design, and then good green planning? The budget. The joke on our team is we had roughly $660 million to look at acquisition, and as Terry points out, you could buy Cleveland for that. So we do not have an acquisition issue. The land is drastically undervalued. So our numbers are incredibly preliminary, as you can see. And it's not to make light of spending $5 million. Trust me, it's still a big M to me. But acquisition not being the issue necessarily, but also acquisition, good, thoughtful planning and design, and then operations and maintenance thereafter. So, thank you.
Thank you.